This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com. I'm not in the plumbing or appliance business, so I can share this hot tip for listeners that happen to be in plumbing and appliance, in particular, the intersection of plumbing and appliance. This came to me, literally, it came into me in a dream. In a dream, I was staying in a hotel, and I was standing in the shower in the hotel and realized that there's one of those little espresso machines in there, in the shower.
Are you sure it wasn't body wash?
No.
Okay.
No. I was astounded. In the dream, I was blown away. You could go, and it made, like you're standing there showering, and there's like a thing in the hotel, and it had these little cups.
They should invent that.
And it's like, and you had a shot of espresso in the shower.
Save yourself a little time.
Came to me in a dream.
All right, some company's probably going to start, or hotel chains
Listen, man,
start doing that.
I know. And I'm just throwing it out there because I'm not in a position to capitalize on it. I'd have to move into plumbing, appliances,
coffee business,
hotel contracting. I mean, come on. Man's only got so much time. Joined today by Dr. Ron Kendall, professor of toxicology.
Yes.
At Texas State University. This is going to be our first ever. There's two firsts.
Texas Tech.
What did I say?
Texas State.
I did? Is there such a thing?
Yeah.
I'm at Texas Tech.
Okay. But is there a Texas State?
Yeah.
Oh,
There's
there is.
so many. Yeah.
Huh. Sorry about that.
No
Texas
problem.
Tech, which I'm just going to go out on a limb and say is better than Texas State.
I agree.
Texas Tech. And there's multiple firsts here because this is our first ever episode. I don't know how we've missed this in all the billion years we've been making the show. This is the first ever episode where we focused on the plight of the Bobwhite Quail.
Yeah.
Not only that, the other first is Dr. Kendall has, and people might hear this and they might not be overwhelmed by it, but just hear us out. We're going to explain why. The first ever FDA approved vaccine for wild birds. Now, this is coming at a time when vaccines are exceedingly divisive in American culture. You know, everybody arguing about the COVID vaccine all the time. Do you still get in trouble for talking about this? Will they still like ban you from YouTube for saying it's controversial?
Hopefully that era is
So
over.
there's like the vaccines have been in the news, but here we have a case of the first ever FDA approved vaccine for wild birds, and we're going to talk about that in the context of what in the hell has happened to all of the quail everywhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, a whole culture. In some states, like the entire culture of quail hunting has vanished in a lifetime.
That's true.
My friends in Texas, my buddy Brad in Texas, they have a big family property, and they have the quail. They still have the quail hunting trucks. All the art is quail hunting art.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have any around when you were a kid in Michigan?
You had to go a little bit south. Southern, not a little bit.
My dad and my friends' dads used to talk about how they used to quail hunt in Pennsylvania, and they're just they were all gone by the time I was hunting.
When I was still in college, so in the 90s, we would go every winter over Christmas break and hunt quail in Southern Illinois. They ain't there.
Right. Yep.
Brad's place, Eturia.
Mm-hmm.
You go in, all the art. It's quail hunting art. They they don't hunt quail. It ceased to be a thing.
Yep.
Where did they used to be?
Well, we're going to talk about all that in a minute. First, we're going to talk about cowboy hats. We're going to get into all that. So much listener feedback on my observation that I was saying that I had a rather perhaps an indefensible position. Dr. Kendall, I'll be curious to get your opinion on this. Where I was saying if you're not livestock adjacent, you have no business running around in a cowboy hat. And I equated it to that if I ran around in a police uniform, if I dressed up like a cop, that would be odd. Right? People would be like, where's he get off dressing up like a cop?
I think you're reaching.
But you can dress up like a cowboy without repercussion.
Yeah, I mean, you get mad at like I don't know, some rock star when they wear
Well,
a
a police
hat?
uniform designates a certain amount of like authority that they
That's-
can.
yes.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I think of a cowboy as having more authority than a cop.
Oh,
You're
Me
viewing
too.
it as an occupational like uniform type thing versus like a fashion thing.
There's
I'm
a guy
just saying,
in here
think of
who
the
makes a
world
good
and
point.
think of a world in which you could just run around in a police uniform. Right? It'd chaos. But why is it okay that you can run around in a cowboy suit?
Because it doesn't cause chaos.
Cowboy suit.
Cowboy uniform and a cowboy hat. I mean, I feel like you need one more piece of attire.
A duster.
a
If you have a
uniform.
cowboy hat and a duster,
a
on,
duster.
then you're
Yeah,
pushing
that
it.
elevates it. for
You
sure.
know
some
the
spurs.
the American Prairie Reserve, the movement in that area against the APR, against the American Prairie Reserve is like, and even the head of the American Prairie Reserve acknowledges the genius of save the cowboy, stop APR, right? Like a marketing,
Yeah.
however you feel. I personally am willing seller, willing buyer. They're buying land that's for sale, and as you know, sort of a foundational American principle is that when you buy land, you can do what you want with it. And so if the APR is buying land that's currently for sale and choosing to look at it or whatever, it's their business. I don't know.
True.
It doesn't mean you got to love it, but I mean, it's kind of like an American principle. You know, like you buy if you bought property and said, you know what, I decided on my property, I don't want any fences. It's like, why is that so insulting to people?
It gets a little uncomfortable when we think about in Texas. Remember that one spot in Texas and that one place in Georgia where there were monkey farms.
Well, you're right. You're right.
That's when, then you're like that slippery slope.
I know, but I'm doing like devil's advocacy,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to make a much broader point. So scrap the APR thing. What was I even talking about that for?
Save the cowboy.
That's right. People that are opposed to it say like it's a brilliant bit of marketing. Save the cowboy, stop the APR. So I view it like I'm trying to save the American cowboy, the integrity of the American cowboy. Meaning, if I see a guy, I'm like that there's a real cowboy. I'll say to my kids, that there's a cowboy. Now I don't know. I could be getting duped.
You could be.
So you should have to have like a carrying card to be a real cowboy.
We just had some people in from the Shoshone and Arapaho tribes, and they have to carry what they were calling their Indian card.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Dude ranch hands and stolen cowboy valor. This generated Corinne pulled some good feedback from it. Guy says, I was just listening to Steve's rant on episode 614 about a fake ranch hand at the airport and the prevalence of people wearing cowboy hats. He goes on. I understand that Steve feels like most people he has seen wearing a cowboy hat lately have no business wearing one. As a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, I fully understand his point of view. There are a lot of dipshits that buy surplus military I didn't know this was a thing.
Oh, it's a thing.
There are a lot of dipshits that buy surplus military uniforms and pretend to be service members, veterans, for the attention, instead of growing a pair and actually joining the armed forces. However, as someone who did serve, I am not bothered in the slightest by those. Here he uses a term I have never
I've
encountered.
never
It's
seen
an
that.
interesting and colorful one.
So that term, which I've never encountered, it combines the word knuckle with a euphemism for fornicator. 99% of them are just this. He goes on. 99% of them are just attention-seeking fools who mean no harm, pose no harm, and rarely fool anyone worth fooling. The most they will ever achieve is a few moments of stolen valor. He's speaking not
this
about the
guy.
military uniform. I think he's speaking about stolen valor. Like, is wearing a cowboy hat when you're not in the livestock business, is that stolen valor?
Not quite.
So funny. I love this guy.
I love it. Stolen valor. He goes on, but even though I understand Steve's misgivings about wannabe cowboys, his contempt is misplaced. It's a hat. People like different types of hats. It's their right to express themselves freely, and I will fully defend anyone exercising that right. Even the night school rejects that dress up as service members or cops.
That's a little harsh on the night school.
Long story short, everyone can tell the difference between a real cop, cowboy, veteran, etc., and the wannabes. Additionally, it's kind of weird that Steve is so bent out of shape over the cultural appropriation of cowboys. Let the clowns be clowns.
Mm-hmm.
Love you, William.
Another guy. This is in reference to episode 614. Quote, I'm quoting him here. Steve was complaining about people in cowboy hats. As much as I agree with his opinion on this, Steve needs a little reminder that these wannabe cowboy hipsters are currently keeping the beaver pelt market alive and well. I've acknowledged this again and again. Every time I bring it up, I acknowledge this. He goes on to say, well, I may think these people look like idiots. As long as my beaver pelts keep selling, they can play dress up all they want. Another one called Cowboy Hats on Liberals. Dear MeatEater crew, Steve again got to talking about his disdain for folks wearing cowboy hats and other Western wear who don't work in a livestock adjacent industry. I think his point can fundamentally be distilled into the perspective that cowboy hats and boots are use specific. And if you don't work in that industry, then the need for their use doesn't exist. But I think Steve should consider a broader user group. Many people go on trail rides or visit dude ranches on vacation. So they may well have a legitimate use for cowboy hats and cowboy boots. No.
You can ride a horse with a baseball hat on.
Dude, the fact that you
running
would need a
shoes.
cowboy hat to go to a dude ranch.
Yeah.
That's the dress up he's like referring to, right?
No, he says legitimate use.
Yeah, but
For
maybe you
cowboy
want
hats.
a wider brimmed hat.
Keeps the sun off.
Keeps the sun off, you know.
Okay,
Maybe you've
but
had-
let's say you were out golfing all that day.
With a
The
cowboy
sun
hat.
is still shining.
Yeah, it'd be just as appropriate on a golf
cowboy
course.
hat
That's
would work
true.
great on a golf
That-
course.
Why
Yeah.
is it that when you're out in the sun and there's a horse by you, you suddenly need a higher level of neck protection? Do you know what I mean? Like, if they were out digging ditches all day, it doesn't have anything to do with anything.
It seems like the cowboy hat is just a superior hat.
It's
It's better at doing its job than a cap.
Yeah, I'm trying to give airspace to the opposing viewpoint here, but I'll tell you this. I had exposure for a number of years to a dude ranch through circumstances I'll not get into. But I had some exposure. I a number of times spent a little bit of time at a dude ranch. And oddly, the people that worked there were the most cowboy dressing up people on the planet, but they were all rich kids. They were all rich boarding school kids. And their parents would go to the dude ranch. Okay, rich kids from out east. They'd grow up going to the dude ranch and playing cowboy. Then they get older and they get a little rebellious. And then they go to work at the place for a while as sort of like this little act of rebellion. And they would dress up like 70s cowboys. So everybody that works there dresses like a cowboy from the 70s. Everybody that works there. I don't know.
Like the Marlboro Man?
Like, yeah. Like,
Silk scarf.
yep. If you go and watch Rancho Deluxe,
Mm-hmm.
they
Yeah,
all
like-
dress like Rancho
like more
Deluxe.
bell bottomy.
Yeah, and in like, yeah, like 70s. I don't know.
Like, Burt Reynolds in what was the Trans Am movie?
The
Smoking
jeans are
Abandoned.
tighter in the
Smokes.
ass.
Yeah, stuff like yeah. You know when you there's like it's hard to express it. There's a little bit of like at this dude ranch too. There's a little bit of like a little sexy mixed in.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. That seems right.
He goes on. Did I get into? Yeah. Anyways, he says here he's attacking my viewpoint that it's no different than wearing a cowboy or nowhere different than dressing like a policeman. He says the same is not true for a police outfit. The public generally can't go on a ride along and dress like cops as part of their vacation. It's a good valid point. And it's probably illegal to impersonate a police officer.
It is. It's not probably.
I think cowboy hats and boots are more similar to motorcycle jackets and boots. They serve a real purpose when you are riding, but it's also okay to wear them when you are not riding. Same with hiking boots and pants, or the scholarly apparel that Randall might wear, such as a tweed blazer with elbow patches. That being said, I totally agree that spurs in the airport are a bit much. He goes on. A few years back, I made plans to go trail riding for the first time. I wanted a cowboy hat, but there aren't any Western wear stores near me in New Jersey. Even though John Stetson, this is a little thing I didn't know. Even though, he goes on, even though John Stetson is from New Jersey.
That should be
So
a
I
trivia
ordered a
question.
Stetson hat off Amazon. It came in a plastic bag, flat as a pancake. I processed the return, and the new one also came flat as a pancake. And Amazon told me to just keep the old one. I did that 5 more times and ended up with 7 Stetsons.
Oh, no.
All flat. Then COVID hit, and I never went trail riding.
I think maybe he wasn't getting legit Stetsons from his Amazon order.
He says he's been wearing it gardening instead.
Corinne, did you label this cowboy hats on liberals, or was that
No,
their thing?
That was his thing.
Because I would argue that the tourists wearing cowboy hats is mostly from like conservatives from Orange County who move up here because they're tired of liberal California, and they're like, I'm going to wear my cowboy hat now.
Yeah.
Like,
And
those
then
kind of folks.
Like, I've had enough of the bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to Montana and getting a cowboy
Yeah.
hat.
Hello, fellow cowboys. How do you do?
Last one. Is this the last one? Last one. Airport cowboy hats. He begins his note with salutations. I couldn't help but think about Steve's disdain for people dressing as cowboys in the airport and wonder what the difference is between that and anyone wearing a baseball jersey to a baseball game. I'm going to my kids tonight. I'm going to there's a thing for my kids' debate club.
Oh, who's in debate?
Jimmy.
Oh, great.
This guy's not invited. Okay, so he's wanting to compare. Okay, it's not like the fan is going there to pinch hit or step on the mound because the entire bullpen was somehow injured, but rather to support who they're rooting for. Chances are people in a Stetson and Spurs are not cheering on their home team on the range. But would it be fair to say that maybe they're such big fans of the Western lifestyle that they choose to portray themselves in that fashion? I don't believe the two situations are exact replicas of one another, meaning it's an imperfect analogy, but they seem hand in hand. Sports fans who waste their time and money dressing like overpaid, whiny athletes is a close enough comparison in my less than humble opinion.
I disagree.
Yeah.
Also, athletes taking astray. What's going on here?
I think that the one toward the end is a good point.
It's a great point. It's almost too obvious.
Right here.
He goes on to say, as for Steve's aversion for cowboy hats that aren't in livestock adjacency, he goes on, he says, I wonder how the non-hunting public view camo worn anywhere but the woods. No,
camo's become
not the same.
Yeah.
I don't think you should wear it if you don't, I would question wearing it if you're not in an outdoor adjacency lifestyle. Like snowboarders, that annoys me, and I can pick that up as my next thing that annoys me.
Yeah,
I'm shopping around.
I gotta know though, is a small part of this based in the fact like that you feel like you just can't pull off a cowboy hat yourself?
We've seen Steve in a cowboy hat. I think he looked swell.
Swell.
I'll return again to Ronnie Bame. To 2 things Ronnie Bame told me. Never wear a hat that says hello before you do. And I wear a fur hat, but I'm a trapper. and what was his other one?
Personality has more personality.
No, yeah, and likewise, he says this. He says, never wear a hat that has more personality than you do.
This should be a shirt. This should be a podcast-inspired MeatEater shirt.
Never wear a hat that
With
says
a
hello before
cowboy
you do.
hat with that. Or like, raccoon hat and a, yeah.
Hey, did you eliminate the need for Brody to talk about? Oh no, Brody, are you ready?
Oh, are we jumping to spearing?
Just very quickly. 'Cause I don't-
Let me scroll back up there. It's still at the top.
Oh, I thought
right?
you were researching it.
I did
Then
a
we're gonna get
little
into quail.
bit. We got a letter from someone here in Montana. Just wanted to make sure that all interested parties were aware that an amendment to the Montana fishing regulations has just been proposed that would open the Western District. Montana's divided in 3 fishing districts:
East, Central, West.
Open the Western District up to spearfishing for northern pike. Several members of the crew are major proponents of spearfishing. He's just trying to he supports this thing. He likes the idea. I'm not sure if this thing will get approved or not, but the thing is a lot of Western Montana's waters are already open to spearfishing for northern pike. Like where there's pike, it's generally a lot of them. You can already go spearfish them.
Not all of them.
Not all of them, but a lot of them. Because
Yeah.
they have pike in a lot of places. They'd rather not have them, but they're not going anywhere. But it's basically like a free-for-all on them where they are. Like you were saying, the Sealy Swan, the Clearwater. There's a small lake outside of near Flathead
Sealy Swan
Lake.
and Clearwater, the
Yeah.
same thing, but yeah.
Yeah. So there are already places where you can do that. I don't have a problem with it. Like, I think it'd be great.
I think it'll probably pass because they're trying to slow down the spread of northies.
Yep.
I call them northies. When I was a kid, like my county, I lived in Twin Town, but it was in Muskegon County.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a wealthy neighborhood called North Muskegon, and everyone that didn't live in North Muskegon hated the
Oh,
people
I
from
see.
like class
Yep.
angst,
Yep.
And we called them northies.
Gotcha.
Everybody hated them except them.
Yeah, I mean, there's places where you can shoot pike with rifles. What's the big deal with spearing them?
Where can you shoot a pike with a rifle?
I think there's still a seat. It may have been ended, but
The
there at a
rifle
time,
opener.
like in Vermont, you could shoot them with rifles. Some places in the north, like Vermont, had a
Wow.
yeah.
That seems like it encouraged some hazardous behavior, man.
They may have ended it, but there
Like
was
taking shots at a shallow angle over
Yep.
toward the neighbor's house or
Admit
something.
it, you shot
Yeah.
at a fish or two in your life.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 100%, man.
Little off topic, but I grew up in Whitefish and had a schoolmate acquaintance kid that was like 2 grades older than me die spearfishing in Whitefish Lake. He punctured a electric wire under the water.
Shocked
Super
him?
sad. Yeah, shock.
Through,
He never
through the ice spearing, not spearfishing.
No, he was under the water
Oh.
in the summer, swimming around looking for carp, I believe. And
and he hit
I think he just
what?
ran
Live
into
wire.
a wire. Yeah, an electric wire. I believe it was
to a
probably
dock.
220 volt to a water pump that was
Oh my god.
probably
really?
watering somebody's lawn. Yeah. And he never came up, and his friend that realized he never came up dove in after him, and when he touched him to release him, he got electrocuted and almost died too. But he didn't. I never heard what ended up happening, if there was a lawsuit or whatever.
Yeah, I want to
Lord,
jump
man.
one
Crazy.
more thing about this spearfishing thing. You know how spearfishing walleye is legal in like is it Lake Michigan?
Well, it's legal on it's legal north of Thunder Bay on the Lake Huron side. And it's legal south of Thunder Bay on Lake Huron, and it's legal south of Grand Haven on Lake Michigan side.
And the rod and reel guys get all bent out of shape about it.
well, they don't have any reason to
I know.
because what they did, they made a special license so they know how many spearfishing certificates are being sold, and all spear fishermen have to submit a report, and they're going to be quite surprised at how few
Exactly.
wally dogs are getting killed
Yep.
relative to rod and reel guys.
Yeah,
And I
and
don't
I-
think it is that contentious.
Right.
It's
Well,
just it's a non thing. It's
right.
a non thing.
that,
you know?
I mean, when I was doing my research there and something I found was that there'd be
That's the fear.
some
That's what-
conflict.
yeah, they made
between-
it. They went in and made it provisional.
Yep.
Subject to revisiting, and it's a non-issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's a non-issue. But that's even different because there you're talking about a native fish. Like you could always spear trash fish. I don't like to use that term, but
rough fish.
yeah, non-game.
Yeah, non-game.
I take that back. Phil, edit me out saying that.
Got it.
Make it so I go boop. Non-game. You could always spear non-game, and they're trying to open up like walleye, northies. It might just be like primarily walleye.
And Montana's weird
Lake
too
trout.
because they have like in some places in the state, game fish are game fish. Certain species of game fish are game fish, and then you go somewhere else in the state, and that species is not managed as a game fish. Like yellow perch, there's places where there's no limit. Then in Canyon Ferry, you can only keep 10,
which makes them a game fish.
Yeah,
they magically become a game fish.
So it gets confusing.
All right, we're gonna talk about quail.
Yeah.
Everybody ready? Can you explain toxicology, Dr. Kendall? I think of drunk people.
Okay, I can. First of all, Steve, I'm glad to be here and listen to this interesting conversation.
What's your take on it, on the cowboy hat deal? Like if you were a dictator of the world.
Well, I think you got something there. I come from West Texas, and we have true cowboys there.
Yep.
Okay.
And,
not as good as ours, but
and generally speaking, we see true cowboys dressed as cowboys with cowboy hats associated with livestock or some agricultural industry. I, in fact, have a cowboy hat because I have a ranch with cows. Okay,
Oh, there you go.
So that's the real
You
deal.
got your card.
I knew it
You passed
was
the
a
test.
good episode to talk about this.
Yeah.
He's got a
since
cowboy
we have
card.
him as a
So I
guest.
got my cowboy card, and I sold and bought a lot of cattle, believe it or not. But an environmental toxicologist is
environmental toxicology.
Environmental toxicologist is an individual studying the transport, fate, and effects of chemicals and drugs on wildlife and human health, how it affects reproduction, well-being, and your health, including cancer. So that's what I do, and I've done it all over the world. I've traveled the world in my work and have been involved with the formation of what we call the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry that just celebrated its 45th annual meeting, bringing in people from all over the world this year to Fort Worth, Texas. And that's my 45th meeting. I was
really?
a charter member.
Great.
So I've been involved a long time in this field. In fact, even in my high school and in my college days, working with insect toxicologists that were developing chemicals to kill insects that affected cotton. Well, the question...
The boll weevil.
The boll weevil. And so...
I wouldn't know one if I saw one.
Well, I know what they look like. And but anyway, I got exposed to this kind of thinking a long time ago because at that point, I was just a teenager working in a lab. And at that time, people didn't really think about what those chemicals were doing to our environment and to our fish and wildlife resources and to our health. Those were the days that kids would drive behind a truck spraying DDT to kill mosquitoes, and they'd just ride in the fog. So, I mean, we just didn't understand that. So what I've been involved with is really a very challenging, interesting field, but also a sobering field because on a global basis, we are dramatically impacting our planet. And it concerns me with the loss of biodiversity and the amount of chemicals and chemical transport that now we're identifying even in remote areas of the Arctic and in the rainforest and so on. But as we were talking earlier, Steve, you were mentioning what happened to the quail. And, you know, I was, Corinne and I were talking when I came in. She said, "Where are you from, Texas?" And I said, "No, I actually grew up in Florence, South Carolina. It was not far from Myrtle Beach. It's called the Coastal Plain of South Carolina. And I grew up in the country. And I was lucky to have a grandfather that mentored me to the outdoors. He gave me a lot of my environmental ethic. And he was taking me quail hunting. I guess I was 6 or 7 years old and would walk around behind him as he would quail hunt. I didn't have a gun, but I was just so interested. And he had a fine bird hunting dog, a Llewellyn setter, and it used to be so interesting to me to watch him quail hunt. And he was a very good shot. So by the time I got to be 12 years old, my grandfather actually would let me use his fine bird dog and I started to quail hunt. And I can remember getting my first quail. Now, when I was a kid in South Carolina, I actually hunted in a 5-mile radius of my house. I knew that territory. I walked it and walked it. And I had a map, and my map identified quail coveys. And in the fall,
help me understand what that means.
I'm going to explain, Steve.
Oh, okay.
What a covey is.
Oh no, I mean the map. You're going to get to that too.
I'm going to get to the map.
Oh, great.
Because
So I need to see one of these maps.
well, that map was like priceless to me because it identified where the coveys were. Okay, it's where I found a covey, and a covey of quail in the fall of the year back when I was a kid, maybe 15 or 20 quail, 25 quail in a group, and they roost on the ground together in a circle each night. They feed together, and this is for protection and also for thermal regulation. Well, the bird dog, the hunting dog, and I have 5 Llewellyn setters today, but those dogs learn how to trail that scent, and they point the covey, okay, maybe 15, 20 yards away, 10 yards, and then you walk in front of the dog, and those when those quail come up as a covey, that's pretty sporty shooting because most people, they get so emotional when that big covey comes up and you got 20 buzz bombs taken off. They can't focus. So it's a real art form.
You got to pick one out.
You got to pick one out, and you got to stay on him. So it's a real art form of wing shooting. Okay, and this map, I was a kid, loved the outdoors and loved my fishing and my it was my quail hunting, and so I had this map. And I had generated of all the covey haunts that I knew where I could go and find 3 or 4 coveys in a 2-hour period based on that particular terrain. So, my interest in quail goes back to the very beginning. And what's so concerning now is that I could literally walk out my back door sometime where I grew up, and there'd be a covey of quail walking across the backyard. Okay, and that
when you were a kid.
When I was a kid.
Yeah.
Now, in that 5-mile radius of where I grew up, you might be lucky to find one covey. Where when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, there'd be 50, 60, 80 coveys. Okay,
Wow.
So the impact has been dramatic. Now, I'm real fortunate. My quail hunting buddies from a kid, from 12 years old, we still hunt together. We still bird hunt together. They're both medical doctors in South Carolina. And so they tell me, basically wild quail hunting as we knew it as kids is gone unless you're spending massive amount of money to manage a ranch or something. So we've seen this happening across most of the wild bobwhite quail hunting range.
Do you mind laying out that range for folks?
Yes, the wild bobwhite.
I guess if you, just to clarify my question, pick some point. I don't know, like it could be 1950, it could be 1492. I don't know, like at some point, where were they?
The wild quail, the wild bobwhite is a historically valuable game bird, and we often call them the canary of the prairie. They're good indicator species of grassland birds. In fact, the bobwhite is among the most declining bird in America today. It's amazing. And so the bobwhite, looking back in time, probably had huntable populations in up to 25 states.
Oh, is that right?
Through
Okay.
the southeast, out into Texas, up into Iowa, Kansas, and so on. So when we look at it now, some of the best quail hunting left in America is in West Texas and Southern Texas. But it's West Texas. It's where I've done a lot of my research. And we call it the Alamo of wild quail hunting left in North America for bobwhite quail. And so, it's really an interesting thing to look at as we're losing this biodiversity, okay? And because the wild quail, people love them in Texas, and there's so much interest in preserving and conserving them, not just hunting them, but they are just an important indicator species of our grassland birds. And so I originally came to Texas. Corinne, you were asking me. I originally came to Texas in 1997 to found an institute called the Institute of Environmental and Human Health, okay? And I was also a founding chairman of the Department of Environmental Toxicology, where we train doctoral and master students in now the field of environmental toxicology. When I was a graduate student, we didn't have those degrees, okay?
Yeah.
So this is an important degree now. And the last 12 years, after moving out as director and chair, I founded the Wildlife Toxicology Laboratory, and that's where we have worked extensively with the United States Food and Drug Administration, and to develop a treatment for a disease in our wild quail. Let me back up a little bit. As we look at agriculture and habitat impacts to our wild quail populations, that's very significant. And for the listeners, the habitat means where quail live, where they occupy to reproduce and survive the winter and breathe in the spring and the summer. So we've seen increase in predator populations like hawks, okay? We can't shoot a wild hawk anymore. So they're all protected. Well, a lot of them feed on quail, including the Cooper's hawk, which is the most significant aerial predator to the wild quail. And so we've seen changes in agriculture, of course, heavy agricultural chemical use, okay? That exposes quail, and so on. So I look at it as a multitude of variables that have come together to suppress our wild quail.
Can I ask you just a timeline question? Like, are we seeing the decline increase more 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 75?
Absolutely.
Like, what's, if we were to graph chart that, what are we looking at across a timeline?
Well, a lot of huntable populations have already been lost, say in the Carolinas and Virginia and so on. But as we even look at Texas for the last, say, go back to the 70s to now, you're seeing a general decline, okay? You have bumps of increases followed by crashes, all right? And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So, but if you look at the curve, over time, the curve is generally going down about 3 or 4% a year. All right,
and that curve pitched off at around when, in the 70s?
Approximately late 60s, 70s. Okay, because when I was hunting quail in the late 60s and early 70s, it was unbelievable. It's okay, and I'm talking about you could go out in an afternoon, find 10 or 15 coveys of wild quail. Okay, in an afternoon, it was nothing back then. Now, people come and may go quail hunting just a few years ago, even in Texas, and I'd heard maybe they'd find one covey and hunt a whole weekend, all right? So that's not very good quail hunting. And when my buddies from South Carolina come to Texas, their standard is at least 20 coveys a day, okay, hunting a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the afternoon. And generally, I could provide that, but only in specific areas. And when we first started looking at the whole quail question, it was largely precipitated by a major crash of our wild quail back in 2010 and in West Texas. And on some of the finest habitat that you could have, a place where quail live. I mean, some of these ranches were superior. There was adequate rainfall. The cover looked great. We were seeing lots of broods of little baby quail. So everybody said, wow, I mean, we're going to have an unbelievable year.
Yeah, everything looked good.
Everything looked good. Well, by the time we got to October, November, nobody could find a quail. I mean, they were gone. And on one of the best ranches you could find, it's a picture book quail hunting ranch, they didn't hunt for 5 years. 5 years. And they had before that had some of the finest quail hunting that you could have ever imagined. It took 5 years to recover that population, even in a good zone of West Texas. So this generated a large research initiative funded by sportsmen, Steve, in Texas. Park City's Quail Coalition, the Rolling Plains Quail Research Foundation, and so on. Sportsmen. And they said, we have got to figure out, when we have this kind of habitat and perfect conditions, climate, and so on, for that particular year in 2010, what the heck happened to our quail? They were literally gone. And our data suggested that we're not talking about losing some of them. On some of the ranches we were looking at, we're talking losing 90%. All right. And so this began a multi-university research initiative to look at environmental contaminants, pesticides, viruses, bacteria, and so on.
Was the fire ant in the mix? And if not, can you hit on that? I hear that all the time.
Well, I know a lot about the fire ant. You're going to got me off track there, but I'll address it.
Well, no, I just thought like the whole what happened when I have this conversation with people who are not authorities like you are. In the mix is this like fire ants.
Well,
kill all the babies.
Believe it or not, for my master's degree at Clemson University, I studied the fire ant, Solenopsis invicta, and I know a lot about them. And we were at that time testing an organochlorine pesticide called Mirex that was utilized to be sprayed from an airplane in a corncob grit bait that the ants would pick up and take into the mound and kill the queen, okay? But it was an organochlorine, like DDT. So we ultimately couldn't use that anymore. And that's a whole nother story. Maybe we can do another podcast on organochlorine pesticides.
I'd love to.
I'm serious.
I'm serious.
And but in my opinion, they are part of the mix, but they didn't wipe out our quail. Okay? They just didn't. And I'll tell you.
And the argument is, just so I'm clear on it, because I might be wrong about this. They when the egg hatches, they bite the hatchling and kill it?
It's possible.
Okay.
But I can still remember, I guess I was about 16 years old. I was quail hunting near my home, and this field burned, and there were lots of quail in this field, like 4 or 5 coveys. All right. And there were fire ant mounds all over the place. And I looked at it, and I said, wow, there's a good bit of fire ant mounds here, and there are quail here. So the fire ant, in my opinion, does not necessarily wipe out the quail.
Yeah.
They may have some impacts on when the hatchlings hatch.
Yeah.
And so on.
But it's not this 90% business.
No, it's not the big gun. It's not the silver bullet.
Yeah.
And but what I'm going to tell you is I think we've identified one of the silver bullets that are really hitting our wild quail. And so I talked about this big project called Operation Idiopathic Decline because nobody knew what was the cause.
What? Tell me that word again.
It was called
idiopathic.
Because,
Remind me?
Because nobody could when a doctor does an Operation Idiopathic evaluation, they don't know what's wrong with you. And so with the quail, this terminology was coined with these foundations coming together, funding all of this multidisciplinary research, and what emerged, and what's been a really undervalued area in wildlife conservation are diseases. Okay, and so this has been one of the big unstudied areas that I became a parasitologist, and I never even thought I would engage that. So with this OID, Operation Idiopathic Decline, big research program, what emerged in Texas, particularly in Western Texas, was the occurrence of parasitic infections. And there were 2 parasites that we identified in our wild quail. And one was the eyeworm. Oxyspirura petraui, the eyeworm. What is an eyeworm? It's a worm that has a sophisticated mouth part, and it locates in the eye of a quail, and it feeds on tissues and so on in the rear of the eye generally, and including the heart, what we call the Harderian gland, which is important for immune function and tear production. Nevertheless, this eyeworm is located in the eye, and they're quite large. A female eyeworm, adult, will stretch across a penny, okay? And if you extrapolated that eyeworm and that little quail to your eye, that eyeworm would be the size of a toothpick.
How are they picking this worm up?
Okay, good question. We have completely defined the life cycle and published this. Steve, the listeners here can go to my website at wildlifetoxicologylab.org. And everything I'm talking about, we've published in the world scientific literature. Okay, so we have pursued this step by step by step, and I'll get to the FDA work in a little bit because that was a decade of work.
Take your time.
But the eyeworm is a pretty sophisticated creature. They have a very sophisticated mouth where they can attach and feed. But
are they native?
They've been around a long time.
Okay.
We're not completely sure of their total biological history, but they are 96% related to the Central African eyeworm in the human called loa loa. And that worm in a human can damage the eye, can result in blindness, actually can penetrate the brain. Okay, so that eyeworm in a quail is highly related to a pathological infection even in the human being. Okay,
Is the quail eye their cuisine of choice? Or do we see them in other bird species?
I'll get to that, Corinne. Lots of good questions here. It's a fascinating life history, and but where the quail basically will release eyeworm eggs in its droppings, okay, as it's in a field feeding, and crickets and grasshoppers come along and eat the droppings. And they ingest the egg. The egg hatches in the cricket gut or the grasshopper, and it develops into what we call the infective L3 larvae. Okay, so it's a larvae. So the quail comes along and grabs that cricket. Believe it or not, that larvae can exit the exoskeleton of the cricket and migrate up the esophagus into the nasal sinus into the eye of the quail.
Coming out of the quail's crop.
Yes.
Or gizzard or something.
The crop. In 10 minutes. That's all. And what we've
kidding,
This
man.
is like
So he
aliens.
10 minutes.
The quail eats that cricket.
Yep.
And the cricket's got the larva in its gut.
Yeah.
And that son of a bitch comes out, shoots up into his nasal capacity or cavity, gets in his eyeball.
You can't believe it, but it's true. In 10 minutes. In 10 minutes.
How does he even, that's so weird, because how does he even know to make a break for it?
It's a lot of things about biology we don't fully understand.
Sure, man. You know what I mean?
But the only thing I know is, number one, the infection carried by a given cricket may be more than one infective larvae. So one cricket could be 10 eyeworms.
Yep.
Okay? And then once that worm gets in the quail, what we've learned now is it pretty much is going to be there till the quail dies. They're long-lived, very long-lived. And they actually mate. The male and female mate in the eye. And they
sick bastard.
They produce eggs. We have the listeners can go to my website and see pictures, but the female eyeworm is loaded with eggs. They're an egg-producing machine. And so basically, they release the eggs. They're swallowed. They go into the alimentary tract. Starts all over. And so, what is so amazing, and we were first ones to discover this, is you can go from a relatively clean quail population, maybe with 10% infection, to a month or 6 weeks later, you have 95% of your birds infected with eyeworms. Okay? So it happens very fast. The epidemiology is extremely interesting. And
Is that because they're a bird that travels in tight little packs, or
we think that precipitates it?
Yeah.
Because when they are with coveys, they are exposed to each other every day. Now in the spring they break up and pair off. Okay, and so that's when they're reproducing. But we're seeing that the infection with the eyeworm can literally emerge into a zoonotic event fast. And so I as an environmental toxicologist studying this, first I said, is it plausible that we could go from a ranch to a county of infection in the matter of a month or two? The answer is yes. It travels fast.
I got to back you up one more time.
Okay.
How do the quails end up dying? What kills them?
Okay. Wow, you guys are aggressive. You want to know? Well, what we're seeing is we've had FDA demonstration ranches where we've been testing the medicated feed I invented. Okay, and the testimonials are amazing because one man and wife live on their ranch, and they used to they wear my phone out calling me about quail flying into their windows and house and killing themselves. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Because it affects vision.
Yeah.
And so once we started using the medicated feed on this particular ranch, right at 4 years ago, not one quail has flown into that house.
Oh, it's driving them blind.
Yeah, that's what we yeah. So
they couldn't feed.
Yeah. And what you got to understand, well, Steve, I'm a quail hunter.
I gather.
I'm an outdoorsman. I'm a rancher, and I'm a scientist. Okay? So I kind of bring it all together. So I'm not just in some lab pontificating. I actually understand quail, their biology, their behavior, and so on. And so I've seen Cooper's hawks go after quail. When a quail leaves the ground flying, they got to be 99% on the go, or that Cooper's hawk's probably going to catch them. It's unbelievable dynamic.
That's why he's hauling ass like that.
You got it. Yeah. And so what I'm trying to say is quail have got to be Olympians, athletes every day. So anything that suppresses their energy or affects their keenness of sight and all, it puts them at a disadvantage. And we know this now because what we're seeing with our medicated feed, we just had a major scientific paper come out in the International Journal of Parasitology, Parasites and Wildlife. It's on my website. People can look. But what we've been able to see is we've been able to increase our quail survivability with the use of the medicated feed up to 40% annually, okay, which most people estimate less than 10% will make it to the next year.
Got it.
We're seeing dramatic increase in survivability and a 300% increase in the quail population compared to untreated sites in the same area. So the point is we know these parasitic infections now, we've got the evidence that they are impairing survivability of our wild quail.
Can you touch on that second parasite?
Yes. The second one that we discovered and published a lot of papers on now is called the Sickle worm. And it lives in the cecum of a wild quail. The cecum is assisting the quail in digesting all the seeds it's eating, okay? The Sickle worm lives and feeds there. And we've seen Sickle worm infections.
What is that thing, the cecum? I'm not familiar.
It's just part of the digestive tract associated with the small intestines. Okay. But again, it's an area that is secreting certain digestive enzymes, particularly for fiber. digestion.
Okay.
All right. But these Sickle worms can build up to large quantities in the quail. Now, Corinne, you asked what the eyeworm was. The Sickle worm is more than 90% related to the roundworm or the ascarid in your dog. It's essentially an ascarid. And I saw your 2 dogs earlier today. I bet you deworm your dogs regularly. At least
they're
one.
due to be dewormed soon.
Good reminder.
Well,
She means to.
yeah. Well, I tell you, these sickle worms can build up. We found 1,700 in one quail.
Oh,
And the poor quail,
What did it look like from on the outside?
well, the poor quail, they have a well-developed breast muscle because when they come off the ground, they explode and they're moving 50 miles an hour in just a few seconds, okay? A dog pointed this bird and the dog caught it.
mm-hmm.
The bird couldn't fly.
Right.
And so they brought it to us and it had 1,700 sickle worms.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, and this particular group was reporting what we call feather piles of kills, of quail kills on the ground. The predators were really hitting them hard. They were very infected with sickle worms. So we think the sickle worm is about as important as the eyeworm, okay? Now, we've learned something from our brethren in Scotland and the United Kingdom where they hunt the red grouse, very important game bird over there. And the red grouse was suffering from dramatic population declines on given years. And research showed that the red grouse suffered from a worm in their cecum as well, okay? It was a sickle worm. And it caused the birds not to be able to fly as fast because they reduced energy from aerial predators. And believe it or not, it caused the female grouse setting the eggs to emit a smell that the foxes could key in on, and they were destroying all the nest. So the behavior of the red grouse by the scientific team in the UK was studied, and the red grouse is eating a lot of fiber, so they have to go get grit every day. All right,
Okay.
that's part of their behavior, and so the Scottish scientist identified where the grit piles were, where the red grouse would go. And they said if we could simulate a grit pile and put a drug in it, maybe the grouse would eat it. Well, they did. And they were able to knock out these infections or suppress them. And the grouse were not experiencing these kind of population crashes anymore. So, and I know this team, and I've been on a program with them both at a quail seminar. But anyway, so we had evidence that the UK and Scotland could do this, but the United States Food and Drug Administration doesn't register drug treatments for wild animals. Okay, so
Can I stop you for a couple seconds?
yeah.
I want to get into this.
Okay.
But I got a couple backup. I got to back up on a couple things.
Okay.
I never thought about high fiber with grit. Does a hawk, does a red-tailed hawk, does he need grit? Does he ever go get grit?
He's mainly a meat eater.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, red-tailed hawks do not go get grit. I've never seen one.
Do they have a gizzard, though? They got to have a gizzard, right? Or does the gizzard only function if it has grit in it?
The latter. Okay.
So the gizzard is a grit contraption.
The gizzard is part of species of birds that are eating grains, seeds. The gizzard is a grinding machine, so to speak, and it requires abrasive substrate like rocks, grit. Okay, so these red grouse in Scotland are eating a lot of fiber, and they have to go to these grit piles every day.
You know, my kids, the reason I'm asking about this, my kids have these pet pigeons.
Mm-hmm.
They use a lot of grit. And what they do is they get all their grit from the shingles on the roof.
Yeah, I believe it.
That could be a toxicology problem.
That
right?
could be a toxicology problem. You got that right. Yeah.
Before you jump into like how you got the drug out there, you were doing all your research on quail in West Texas. Did you find that those parasites were a problem with quail in other parts of the country also?
Yeah, South Carolina.
Yes. Well, what this has been very research intensive, and as far as what I'm telling you now is we had absolutely no clue about this back in 2012, okay? When we first opened the book and said, where do we go with this thing? And so we started looking across the border in New Mexico, and we actually found it in the blue quail, the scale quail, all right? So there is some interface there, and believe it or not, and we've published a paper on this, we've seen it in the prairie chicken, all right? So they are the same genus and species as in the prairie chicken. And I've got a graduate student working on this. We now see it in several species of songbirds, the eyeworm, not the sickle worm, the eyeworm. So this thing could be continental. We've just had samples submitted to us from Montana. And sharp-tailed grouse and the gray partridge.
Yep.
You got it here. It's in Montana. And I'm telling you, an eyeworm is dangerous. They are dangerous in the eye of a bird.
And that could be those same species of worms, the eye and the cecum. Is that saying that right?
Cecum, yes.
Those worms could be in bobwhite quail in Kentucky. They could be in bobwhite quail in South Carolina.
Yes. And then this whole thing is expanding now. And we've had so many people reaching out to us because wildlife disease investigation and wildlife management is just pretty much been ignored, okay? And people just think that if you got great habitat and good rainfall, you'll just have quail.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. That's kind of true. In certain years you will, but I take it back to 2010 on one of the top ranches for quail management in the state of Texas, won all the awards. He lost all his quail.
Yeah.
All right? So that hypothesis of we got a good habitat and some rainfall, we're going to have a lot of quail, that doesn't necessarily work. And so, but what is really awesome is that since we introduced the medicated feed on that particular ranch, he hasn't seen a crash in years. And that's another thing. We've got several of these FDA-approved demonstration ranches, and we've been sustaining huntable quail populations while the neighbors aren't hunting.
You got to give the neighbors some of that stuff.
Well, you can't imagine what I had to go through even to get a ranch approved for a demonstration site.
Let's jump into that. Talk about the FDA. Is there a reluctance that they don't do that? Is there a reluctance that by approving wildlife drugs, there's a Pandora's box and unforeseen consequences?
Well, first of all, I've had a lot of experience at EPA being the past chairman of the Scientific Advisory Panel for implementation of the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA. I know a lot about EPA regulatory mandates. I did not know what I was getting into with the United States Food and Drug Administration.
Okay.
They are very tough at evaluating registration of drugs. I started in approximately 2013-14 developing preliminary data and communication with the FDA about my interest in this whole parasitic disease issue and a treatment. And we had developed a dialogue, and they said it seems to make sense. And historically, FDA, they just don't register drugs for the natural habitat, okay?
Yeah.
So basically, what we got done, and I'm gonna tell you what we got done. It's not a vaccine. It's a medicated feed drug treatment that is the first medicated feed treatment FDA's ever registered for a wildlife species in the natural habitat that will be commercially available. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's first. And they worked with me for many years to get that done. The product now is called Quail Guard. But backing up, when we got started, it was in approximately 2015. And you got to understand, I'm not a drug company. I'm just a professor at a university. And so I submitted all these materials, and I thought I had some pretty interesting data that I knew about a wild quail. Mm-hmm. I knew about their behavior because I have a ranch and I love my quail. And so we ultimately figured out we could get them to come into an enclosure with some openings and feed out of a simulated chicken trough.
Mm-hmm.
A wild quail covey will do that. And it took us a long time to figure that out. And
why do they need to do that rather than you just scattering it out?
Because FDA didn't want just scattering it out at that time. Mm-hmm. They wanted us to target the wild quail.
Understood.
And
because this was still in the testing phase.
It was still in the testing phase.
They didn't want everything running around eating it.
And so it was my son, Ronnie Kendall, that helped me figure this out with what size enclosures would these wild quail come into. We started out, Steve, with a dog kennel 8 by 8 foot by 8 foot. And we had holes in it, and we baited the quail in so they would come in, the covey would, and feed out of a trough, and we could offer the medicated feed.
Like a crab trap.
Like a trap.
It's got little openings.
And Ronnie kept working, and we went down to 6 feet by 6 feet. Then we went to 4 feet by 4 feet. And now he's got a technology called Quail Safe, and it's a third the size of your table here. You could put it in the back of your truck. And it's amazing how the quail will come in and feed, and we can target the wild quail.
But are they over-medicating themselves if they're eating too much feed?
No. We had to go y'all are interesting. I mean, I think you find this interesting.
I love this stuff.
But Corinne, we started out. I had to figure out, could I even treat a bird in the wild, in the natural habitat? FDA wanted to know that. How would we do this? And so I submitted all this data, and in September of 2015, I was invited to FDA headquarters for formal meetings. And
can I got a question about leading up to that. At first, do you just find the address online and write like, "Dear FDA"?
That kinda. It started out
like, I have an intense interest in quail.
It started out. We did a lot of research about who may be willing to engage us on this.
Okay, so you were trying to find someone within.
Yeah, and it was the Office of Minor Use and Minor Species. And I said, that looked to me that they might be
That's
interested.
got to be the right address.
Yeah, so this was like, just pull up your boots and go do it. I had worked with the EPA extensively, but not with FDA. And so I was brought to this meeting, and it wasn't a day of meetings, it was a week.
This is when you finally got their attention.
I had their attention then. And so my sponsoring office told me to be prepared for a 20-minute seminar and to show them what we were going to do. Okay, so I had all these meetings during this week. And on the final day, on Friday morning, I was told that we're going to have a meeting starting first thing, and you're going to walk into a big room of scientists, and they're going to talk to you about this.
Mm-hmm.
And from this meeting, they will either give you a thumbs up that we will go ahead for a registration pursuit, or they'll give you a thumbs down. And so when they opened those two doors, there were close to 70 people in that room.
No, really?
Yes.
From what disciplines?
Environmental science, toxicology, statistics, immunology. It was like a whole room, and I'll never forget it.
They can just attack your stuff from any angle.
From any angle.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I had to swallow pretty deep, and I sat down at the table with my sponsoring office, the director, and my project officer, who was terrific, and they both just leaned over, and they just said, "Get up there and just tell them what you want to do." And I literally, I went to the front of the room. They were all very attentive, and I gave a 20-minute seminar, and I showed them the wild quail. I showed them. What these worms look like. I showed them the dog kennel and the quail. I had videos of the quail coming in. And I explained how we could develop a feed. The quail would eat it, and we had early evidence that we could kill the parasites. And, that was a 3-hour meeting.
Not 20 minutes.
Not 20 minutes. When I got through with my presentation, they began to ask me questions, very respectful questions, and about how they would do this and whatever. And I answered the questions. I didn't try to, I was as straight as I could be. And so the sponsoring office took me back after it was lunchtime then, and the director then, she since has retired, but she said that went really well. There wasn't one condescending comment, not one, in 3 hours, and they could have ripped me apart. There were so many statisticians on the left wall. I mean, there was like 10 of them. The statisticians could have just gone into that, and the toxicologists, the human food safety division people were there, and they were all just discussing all the components I was going to have to deal with. Corinne, I was going to have to determine safety. I was going to have to determine environmental issues. I was going to have to determine how quickly the drug would remove itself from the body of the quail if a human ate it. So I had to, they were all talking, and so that was September. And it took about till December, and I got a letter through my sponsoring office, and they said, "Dr. Kendall, here's what you're going to have to do." And when I read that letter, I took a deep breath and says, "Wow, that's massive amount of work, massive."
What? Maybe I missed this, but were they at all interested in you qualifying the value of having quail on the ground?
They didn't. They didn't debate it. I explained it.
Yeah,
and they got it.
Yep.
They got it. And in not only is a bobwhite quail the canary of the prairie, so to speak, as an indicator species, they're a big-time economic bird. People come from all over the world to hunt wild quail in Texas. And there's a big real estate firm in Lubbock, Texas, where I'm from, and they sell big ranches, And I gave a talk at a sportsman's group, and one of the owners of that company stood up and he said, "What he's saying is the truth." He said, "If you got a lot of wild quail on your property, I can probably sell it faster than if you had an oil well." I'm dead serious. He said it right in front of the whole crowd. This wild quail thing is a big deal, and so.
What about human? What'd you find out about human safety? Like, I shoot a quail that's got he's got a mouthful of this stuff, and I go clean out his gizzard, and I eat his gizzard, and I eat his breast meat and his thighs. What happens to me?
Well,
am I dewormed?
You're gonna have more.
You're good. You're good. We all of this was exploratory, and it drew every bit of experience I had. But we started investigating the drug fenbendazole, and it's been used on a variety of domestic animals. And so, excuse me, but we had to come up with an effective concentration, and what FDA made me do once I had some early testing I'd done with fenbendazole, and we saw it was pretty safe, and we knew it would kill those worms. And so we had to run at the request of FDA. And you got to understand, everything is so formal with FDA. You have to have a good laboratory practice certification for your lab. Sure. So I had to have what we call the GLP officer. So they come in and evaluate you and check your data. And everything we did was under strict protocols approved by FDA. So you just can't imagine. A lot of our reports would be massive, like maybe 1,000 pages of data. They check everything. They don't just skip around. They check everything. And so it was quite a process. Like we had to do safety, and we had to triple the estimated dose and triple the time frame of exposure to look for any pathological issues.
Oh, to check the extremes.
Check the extremes, and there were none. We ran a very nice experiment on all of that. What was really cool, Steve, one of my students, a PhD students, was a terrific chemist, and it's very sophisticated chemistry to look not only at the parent drug, but the what we call the metabolites, okay, the breakdown drug products. So FDA gave us, we had to develop techniques to look at the liver of the quail and see how the breakdown products were clearing the liver and so on. This is all published, and but it took us forever to get the drug validation down. And it required a lot of collaboration with our School of Pharmacy up at Amarillo, Texas. Mm-hmm. They had the right instrument and were willing to work with us, so we had to GLP certify that lab. But we got it done. But what we showed is the drug clears within hours after the birds are removed. Okay, so FDA now has designated you don't even need a day of drug clearance. It clears within hours. So it's very, very safe to the birds, and it clears very quickly.
So you could get, you would get a feeder, let's say, you assuming you're not going to broadcast the seed.
Right.
You could get a feeder and run regular old feed in it. Like you don't need to have treated feed.
Exactly. And that's
get the quail where you got a bunch of these out, and your coveys are using them. And then on treatment time, you come in and put the treated feed in, let it cycle for whatever amount of time, and then shut the thing down or continue back to just regular feed inside there.
Steve, that's terrific. That's exactly what we do.
Hear that, Brody?
So
kicking ass over there.
You guys are awesome.
I'm gonna start to drug up.
Yeah. So we do assist the quail with a fortified feed without the medication.
Yep.
And
to get them coming to that
get
bait
them coming.
Yeah.
But what's cool is my son Ronnie. We have this technology called Quail Safe, but he's developed an electronic Bobwhite Quail call of their covey call.
Got it.
Okay. Now I could do that for you,
please.
Steve.
I've heard better quail.
Oh, my mouth's really dry.
Do you want some water?
Golly, I gotta get.
That's good though.
But that's kind of what it sounds like. I'm sure.
And he puts that out by the feeder.
It's an electronic call, and believe it or not, when these coveys hear that, they'll come from hundreds of yards away, and you can when they know that feed is there, they come by and check it once in a while.
Yeah,
it's amazing. That's their behavioral ecology that we understood, the critical component of the covey call, and they will come from so far to investigate that. And then once they find that feed, that's like a free lunch. And this does not domesticate them whatsoever. These are wild birds, and we can attest to that by, when we hunt. I mean, these things, I know what a wild quail looks like when we hunt them. And so it's really worked beautifully. The electronic call gives it so much more pull of the birds. And like I said, once the coveys start using it, then the summer comes, then early fall, and the hen brings the brood in, the little birds, okay? And they learn to eat the fortified feed, not the medicated feed yet, although it's fine for the little birds. It doesn't hurt them, okay? It's very, very safe. But once they learn, then the little birds learn that's a resource for them, particularly during drought, okay, when maybe seed production is very low. And so we're looking at all of these dimensions now. And so what's kind of pretty awesome is once you get set up to treat, and like one of our ranches is 2,000 acres, and I've got students working out there, so we got some pretty good estimates on the number of birds. But once you're set up to treat with the cost of Quail Guard, you may be approximately able to treat for $1 an acre a year. $2,000.
Got it.
Instead of
So what's that come out? It's how much for a pound of that feed?
I think it sells for the Quail Guard organization. I think it's $50 for a 50-pound bag, so $1.
Okay.
You mentioned wild birds, and there's a lot of places where people are just going and shooting planted, like farm raised quail. Are those operations at all interested in using this stuff, or they're just putting birds out? They're not too they're going to get shot. They're going to get eaten by whatever. They're not worried about treating those birds.
Yeah, a lot of my buddies back in South Carolina, they call them box birds.
Right.
You go to a breeder and you buy 25 in a box, and you go put the box out under a bush, and the birds walk out and you hunt them. Now that's kind of what quail hunting is to South Carolina now,
Right.
compared to us all wild coveys. We're talking about wild quail.
Yeah.
And a pen bird that's released into the wild has a very low chance of survival. And you can't imagine, this is another real value of our ranch. And when you have a ranch and you live with your quail, you learn a lot. But that hen is teaching that brood so much on alarm calls. And I mean, she'll make a certain call and they'll all just freeze and all. They don't learn that in a pen, okay? And so survival is critical for a quail because literally everything wants to eat them. Hawks and raccoons or snakes. Raccoons are terrible on the nest, and so on. So a quail to survive has to be an athlete.
You know that they found that same thing when they were trying to reestablish wild turkey populations. For a long time, they were taking box birds
Exactly.
and cutting them loose, and it just never worked.
It never works.
Because they didn't have the survival instinct. They didn't have. It wasn't appreciated like what level of education they're getting from the hen. And when they finally found success, they found success by catching wild birds and moving wild birds.
Exactly.
And then they had that. I always think of it as they had the right level of paranoia.
Yeah, and
to live.
Another thing too, we just had a second paper just come out in the International Journal of Parasitology. It's on our website for Facebook, but we did a study on the same ranch. It's a massive ranch, and we were able to get 3 6-mile transects where we did a test. And this was the early stages of getting ready to test the efficacy of the drug treatment for the FDA. So I was getting ready for that. But what's really cool, and it's reported in this paper, is that we had 6 miles separated by 2 miles, and 6 miles separated by 2 miles, all on the same ranch. Okay,
It's a big place.
big place.
Anybody hunting that place?
And but what was really interesting, we had feeder systems out there. We had the birds coming. Now, one of the transects, we did nothing. And we had radio collars on birds, so we knew where they were going.
Okay.
We were using radio telemetry, and they weren't flipping across transects. They were located on those transects. But we had one transect with nothing. The second transect, we had just the fortified feed, all right?
Okay.
It was a good quail feed. And then on the third transect, we introduced the medication, the drug. And so we did 2 years of treatment. In that 2 years, that drug treatment had a 300% increase in wild quail. 300%. And there was no difference between doing nothing and introducing the fortified feed.
Really?
That was not significantly different. We were surprised. But when you introduce that drug,
I would have thought it'd be good, better, or bad, better, best.
Well, the data's the data, but
Yeah.
it could be on a given year. Might be. I do think helping the birds, particularly in drought years, is critical.
Yeah.
I do. But on the given years we were working on this particular ranch, what we saw is it wasn't just the feed; it was the drug. And that when you introduced that drug, we literally had a population explosion.
So do most places, if you go South Carolina, we talked about Texas, whatever, do most places have enough birds left that bringing in the medicated feed, bringing in the medicine is going to be enough? Because it seems to me that it would need to be paired with some translocation of birds, because how you can go put all the medicated feed in the world out, but if there's no birds to find it, there's no birds to find it.
Or good habitat.
Well, those are great points, and there are attempts now to reintroduce quail into East Texas. Texas used to have quail all over the state, and they have kept retreating west, and you pretty much you got to get to Abilene before you start getting into quail again. It's amazing. So they're trying to reintroduce quail into East Texas, and I don't know where all of this is going, Steve, except my data tells me with hard information that we've been able to sustain sustainable, huntable populations on our FDA-approved demonstration ranches while the neighbors weren't hunting. And that's a fact. We're writing that paper up right now.
Yeah.
But
the neighbors weren't hunting because there was no quail to hunt.
They just didn't have the quail. And so I think those are real acid tests, and because what our whole goal has been is sustainable, huntable populations, because as I explain on my website that it was the sportsman that funded all of this. It wasn't a federal grant; it was the sportsman, and they cared about the quail.
Paid for the turkey work.
Exactly.
Then people wind up criticizing sportsmen to be like, "Oh, you just want to save them so you can hunt them." And you're like, you know what? That's partially true. Well, it's not all the way true, but it's partially true.
Well, quail hunting is kind of a religion in Texas, and the Park Cities Quail Coalition has a banquet every March, and they'll have 1,000 people there for raising money for quail, and they can raise maybe a couple of $1 million that night.
Yeah.
There's so much interest in this, and I want to put things in perspective to how important quail hunting is in Texas. I gave a talk 5-6 years ago with a Scottish scientist that had done a lot of work on the red grouse in Scotland. Now, in hunting the red grouse in Scotland, they're hunting on the moors, and the grouse are driven, and you have a stand, and you got a guy loading the gun for you. You're shooting so much.
Yeah.
You have a loader that hands you the gun, and you may stay in a castle or something. So I'm serious. I've never done this. I want to do it before I die, but I've heard it's pretty elite, And I was talking to this scientist that had done a lot of work with the red grouse, and a graduate student and I were having lunch with him, and I said, I just always thought that was amazing, and I said it's got to be the pinnacle of wing shooting, wild bird wing shooting in the world. He said, "Oh, no." He said, "It's your West Texas quail hunting that we over in Scotland look at. You're out with a Jeep and got fine bird dogs and pointing these wild bobwhite quail and
staying in a regular house. And that just staggered me because I said, you're telling the truth." And my good friend Rick Snipes, he has a ranch in West Texas, and Snipes Ranch, and we did a lot of the early work on his ranch. But he calls it the pageantry of the hunt, and it's a lot to it. Getting the dogs ready, loading the Jeep with the bird dogs, and
You
Putting
got
your cowboy hat on.
Yeah, he doesn't wear a cowboy hat, but he's got a seat sitting out in front of the Jeep, off the ground. I mean, it's cool looking.
Yep.
And so it's a lot going on there. It's very colorful, and dogs were pointing, and coveys are getting up. So it's quite a spectacle, to be honest. And we were recently on Sportsman's Classic TV with Mr. Dorsey. You might know that. Yeah. He came and quail hunted with us, and we did a great story. And we had Rick leading the hunt, sitting in the front of the Jeep. So, but it's a lot of pageantry to it. So I look back to my this scientist and talking about that, and it just really hit me hard. Like it's right here in my backyard. That what they are looking at is probably some of the best in the world.
The pinnacle, yeah.
It's the pinnacle. And Steve, you may want to come quail hunt with us.
I'm getting excited about it now.
Oh man.
The main thing I'm churning in the back of my head is how my buddy Brad can get on this program. Now I know you put it out using the feeder.
Yeah.
Will that be that? Like if a landowner, a rancher, concerned party wants to try this on their place, is it prescribed? Like you have to do it such and such way, or else you're in violation of the law? Or do you anticipate there'll be people buying a sack of this stuff and just putting it in a seed spreader and driving down the road and see what happens?
Good point. The FDA label said it's recommended to use strategic feeders. Recommended. Okay.
Because once someone buys it,
so I can see other uses. But again, looking at it, the FDA label, they did not make it totally restrictive. No.
Yeah.
They just recommended it, and because I can just see a lot of value. Maybe in a pellet form in the future. Yeah. The quail will accept the pellet form. The feed is a crumble now, and it's highly palatable. When we go to the medicated feed, the quail they accept it immediately. We've determined all of this with video evidence.
So how does someone like someone wants to apply this and try it? Where do they go? How do they begin? I mean, they're not buying it all on Amazon, I don't imagine.
No. My son has an organization called Quail Safe, and it's got all this information on it, quailsafe.com. We've been working with Bryant Mills in Aledo, Texas. They've been terrific. They manufacture the feed. Okay. They do a beautiful job. The feed is incredibly nutritious. We have the science on that.
And anybody can buy it.
Anybody can buy it. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. If this is why this made U.S. history, this is the first medicated feed article to be registered for a wildlife species and the natural habitat to be commercially available. So this made history. And what I'm proud of, like I said, Corinne, earlier, we weren't a drug company, okay? This was 8 years of working with FDA and then another couple of years of preliminary data. So we did it with graduate students, and graduate students don't stay but a few years. So we had to go through multiple graduate students, and I had some amazing students that, well, you can look at my website and see how many publications we've got. One of my past graduate students, through her doctoral work, got 20 peer-reviewed scientific publications from her doctoral work. That's a lot.
Off this project.
Yeah.
Have you had any interest from like state game agencies using this stuff?
Yes.
Because one of the challenges with it is it's a very targeted solution for a widespread problem. Like you said, like you fixed the quail problem on one ranch and the neighbors didn't have any quail.
Yeah, that's a good point. this is an evolving process. It was evolving at FDA.
Yep.
It's evolving in terms of engagement with management agencies and so on. Traditionally, state management agencies are habitat.
Yeah.
And as I told you earlier,
Which I usually applaud.
yeah, I mean, I'm all into habitat, but habitat's not all of it. And so when I lost quail and my good friends lost their quail on superior quail habitat, that the years I told you,
Yep.
I started saying, it's more than habitat. And I, as a scientist, said, there's something driving this, and there's something driving these crashes. And what's cool, like I said, when we've been treating these properties, we haven't seen the crashes. We've been having sustained huntable populations.
Well, but for how long has it been available for?
It was registered May 23rd, 2024. That's just
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
So you just don't. There's not. You're not yet in a position where you've got 100 land managers who've gone out and you haven't yet got 100 land managers to go out, take the equipment, apply it on their property, give it time to work. Like you just don't know where this is going to head right now.
yeah, and what we found out, it takes about 3 years. Okay, into your second year, you and get in the right conditions, you can see a real pop in numbers, and we report that in this paper that's just come out.
Yeah, 'cause I can see the time because you got to do it. You got to acclimate them. You got to get the coveys coming. You got to acclimate them to the feed.
Yeah.
You know.
So it takes. You just can't go throw the feed out there and say, "Oh man, I'm gonna have a bunch of quail this fall." It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. It's a process, and you got, and Ronnie, my son Ronnie, he has a website that explains all of this. He's got beautiful videos and whatever. It's called quailsafe.com, and there is a strategy, and you need to know how to place these instruments to deliver the feed, how to manage them. It's almost, once you put them out and get the quail coming, it's pretty much you're done.
Once you deworm a quail, how long is he dewormed for?
Got a student working on that. They will be reinfected the next year, probably.
Okay.
What we've learned, though, Steve, is on our demonstration ranches, and we have another scientific paper on this, we are suppressing the cycle.
That was my next question.
In other words, the percentage of insects carrying the infective larvae is significantly reduced going into a multi-year medicated feed treatment.
Yeah, and you said they'll be reinfected next year, but like a 1-year-old quail is ancient, right? Like,
well, that's what a lot of people think, but it's not necessarily the truth.
Really?
And we have data to prove this now. On one of my outstanding PhD students that just finished this spring, he had a 4-year project on a ranch and really intensively monitored them. And what he found compared to an untreated area in the same county close was he was seeing a 40% survivability to the next year versus a 10%. Okay?
Yeah.
So no wonder when he would do his fall covey counts, it was phenomenal. Now, what does that mean? Well, the teams go out and right at first light, they'll listen for these covey calls. And at a given point, you hear the coveys express themselves with a location call at sunrise, and you count those calls. Mm-hmm. Well, if you hear 5, that's pretty good. If you hear 8, that's terrific. If you hear 10 plus, like you're standing here and you're hearing that call, that's outstanding. He was hearing 15 to 18. You got me? Mm-hmm. Significant numbers. So we are excited about that because we are enhancing quail survivability and sustainability.
Is that
And-
the key to like maintaining numbers? Is to have birds carry over to their second
Exactly.
year?
The most valuable quail on your property is that hen that is able to carry over to the next year and be ready to breed or to nest in March, April. And she could actually give you 50 birds. She could nest 3 times in a summer. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So you want to carry that hen over if you can. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the evidence of this. And the way I look at this, you don't really get it until your buddies that were your teenager hunting partners say there aren't any quail left in our old haunts in South Carolina. They're gone. And I said to myself, man, that's the real deal. And this happened across most of the wild Bobwhite Quail range now. Yeah. And so can it happen in Texas? You better believe it can happen. And so what we're doing, and the way I look at it is, I'm in this for conservation. And I don't shoot many quail anymore. They my buddies, and but I love my quail hunting, and I love my bird dogs, and it's such a beautiful thing to watch a fine dog cover the landscape and work a covey of quail, and just the finesse of it and how intelligent they are. So there's a film some of your viewers might want to look at. It's called thebobwhite.com. That's thebobwhite.com. And it tells, my son produced it with a team from Nashville, and it's won some awards. And but it tells that story of the issue of the quail and how important they are as an indicator of your ranch health and of your conservation ethic. And so we take this pretty serious, and the family has all dedicated itself to this work over many, many years. So, my wife, Colleen, has been counting quail with me for years. And I just wanted to share something with you, too. We drive around on the ranch, and when we get up a covey of quail, when Ronnie was a little boy, he grew up out on that ranch. And I get excited over every covey I see. I count them and want to see if they're young birds or older birds, but every covey I saw, I always get excited. And I'll never forget, one day he looked at me, he's in the Jeep, and he said, "Dad, why do you get excited over every covey of quail you see?" He said, "We got quail all over the place." I said, "Because we may not have them one day, and we lost them in South Carolina, and we can lose them here." And so now, when he drives around, he gets excited over every covey he sees because he values it now. He understands that, so many people don't have them, even in West Texas.
Sure.
I've got a question about quail numbers on public lands, because I see this so far as a private land solution, and I know this maybe kind of piggybacks off what you were asking, if there's state game agencies interested in this.
There's no way they're not going to be if it winds up being effective. There's no way they're not going to be interested in it.
But then if on public lands you have these feeders, and then with the issue of toxicology, are there studies underway of what Quail Guard on the land has on other species? Who knows? Not that.
Well, and good question, Corinne. I appreciate.
Honestly, it was
your
Ryan
insight.
Callahan's question that I'm asking on his behalf.
What we've seen in 10 years of field work, and massive amount of observation, video data, and so on, we are not seeing non-target. We are not seeing non-target species effects. Okay, and what we know as well, if you utilize quail-safe technology on a property, you're targeting the quail, pretty much. And so again, we do when we were doing all of these tests, like our efficacy studies for FDA and whatever, we would do circular investigations around any treatment area to see any evidence,
Like soil health type stuff as
yeah.
well. Mhm.
So again, it's and the rate at what we're using is pretty low, and so I feel really good about it, and I'm sure going to use it. And so I look at it, and to me is I want to help the wild bobwhite. I don't want to lose him, and so I'm looking at this. We're starting to look at songbirds too, and I think we may be needing to investigate songbirds because we've already got the evidence. It's in songbirds.
Are there groups of individuals or other, I don't know, are there people who are against the idea of not administering, but offering drugs to wild animals as the thing that you can bring this out further to, who knows if there's a drug developed for EHD,
is there an organized
is there
opposition
yeah.
effort?
I haven't not run into that.
Like would we end up having drug companies make all kinds of things to hoof rot, would we?
The minute they find something for hoof rot, I can guarantee you that someone's going to be going through this process on it.
Right.
I'd say for the most part, I haven't seen major opposition.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen mainly amazement and fascination that we can help a species like
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I see it, we are experiencing a lot of climatic variation we had 116-degree temperatures last summer in West Texas. We're not the Mojave Desert.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing a lot more plus 100-degree days, 112, 114. And you look at all these variables and you think about the stress organisms are having to deal with in a climate that may be changing. I'm not going to debate that right now, but I'm going to say when it's 116 degrees out there and you're a quail nesting on the ground, that ground's probably 200 degrees. So anything we can do to help that quail survive those extremes, that's what I'm looking at. And at the same time, this past winter, it's 5 degrees with snow on the ground. We can go to those extremes. And by the way, Steve, that's where quail safe becomes critical. Those quail will bore down through the snow. We got the videos. They want to get in there and eat, and because they can't get to the feed on the ground with the snow.
Yep.
So if you go to that website, you'll see the quail. They get them a little tunnel to go in and feed.
Yeah.
And anything we can do, I'm looking at it as a conservationist, and anything we can do to help sustain those populations.
I think it's just an interesting question when we think about, making drugs available for animals as, beyond the habitat question, right? Isn't there something out there for wild sheep? And so this is the second drug for
not
a wild
something
animal?
not something you can go, a private person can go buy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was for sheep, but that was an agency. That wasn't publicly
okay.
available.
I'm ignorant to all of that.
No, that's why this was so unique. And they used a trough that the sheep came in, bighorn sheep came and ate out of, and they offered them a drug for lungworm. But that was agency driven.
Okay.
So what I'm saying, and I was very proud that FDA worked with me on this, because this was the first time that a wildlife species was a drug registered for a wildlife species in their native habitat that was going to be made commercially available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not an agency.
I see.
So that's what made the journey so complicated. And to be honest, FDA was very difficult they held us to the same standards as the drug companies. And they don't work with universities very much because I met with a drug company with their vice president of research, and they said to do something like this for a new registration for a new species, they budget 10 years. Okay? So universities turn over so much in 10 years. The students come and go. You know what I mean? And whereas the drug company, they got a whole lot of people that can work on this. So FDA wasn't really used to working with professors, but they did work with me. I had an assigned project officer that stayed with me the whole way through, and she was wonderful. And then I had to deal with all these different entities within the agency, with all the components I've been talking about. So this thing's been really rigorously evaluated, and they made it real clear. We're going to hold you to the same standards we hold drug companies. You're going to have to do everything we told you to do, and that's it. So I was kind of proud that we did it in 8 years instead of 10. but my sponsors thought it was forever. And, oh, man, it was rough, Steve. But they all thought we should just be able to get done next year. You know, I was explaining, listen, like on some of these projects, a massive amount of data, okay? And the FDA, when I turn a project in, they would get 6 months to look at it. 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
And then if they had any questions and you had to redo anything and you had to resubmit it, they'd get 6 more months.
Oh, my goodness.
So, it would drive me crazy. I tell you, you notice my hair wasn't this gray in 2012. And I'm telling you, it was the toughest thing I've ever done. But I had great students, a great team. I want to acknowledge my assistant, Tammy Hendricks, who was terrific, been with me for 25 years, and she stood right by me through the whole.
What color's her hair?
She's not. No, she's still younger. But some days I'd walk into her office and just shaking my head. She said, "Don't worry, we're gonna get through it one day." So we actually had a party in Fort Worth associated with that scientific meeting I mentioned earlier in the podcast,
drug party,
Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. So I had some of my past students, current students, and Tammy, and we just really had a great time finally getting through that. But I've just had wonderful people and wonderful students, and very thankful about that, and thankful the family's help. And like I said, my son, I'd have never, when we started off with Quail Safe, I had to find some way I could show the FDA we could get those quail to come into some kind of system where we could target them. And so, like I said, you'll find the website, quailsafe.com. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I want to congratulate you on the whole thing. But before we wrap, though, tell people, like, what's the best single place they can go to see what's going on and figure out if it's right for their property, and is to go to quailsafe.com?
Yeah, a guy would go to quailsafe.com and talk.
You can buy all the stuff you need there.
Yeah.
Excellent, man. I appreciate it. Again, Dr. Ron Kendall, professor of toxicology, Texas Tech University. Go to quailsafe.com to check out the work. Also, can you name the 2 foundations you've been working with?
Yeah, the 2 foundations, Park City's Quail Coalition. They have a nice website, and the Rolling Plains Quail Research Foundation.
10-4.
I'm not going to eat any more chocolate-covered grasshoppers, that's for sure.
I remember the nights when I was 17. Me and them dogs would be down by the creek, feeding Marlboro Lights in a little Jim Beam. They'll bawl on the track and they'll chop when the tree. At the base of the ridge where we cut out, I'd sit on the tailgate and wait for a sound. Levi and Clyde had their nose to the ground. We're the last of our kind, we were hunters and hounds. Up from the shoals and out in fields, down through the holler, back up through the hills. Lord save my soul and he'll lead me to see what these old hounds have put up this tree. Well, now hunters, hounds, ain't but a few left around. They've cut all the timber and the old timers died out. The moon shining bright and the leaves on the ground. We're the last of our kind, we were hunters and hounds. He had a jaw full of tobacco and a shirt pocket of lead. I remember saying that an old man once said, hunt 'em when you can and keep 'em good and fed. Son lost is lost and run over is dead. Well, now hunters and hounds ain't but a few left around. They've cut most timber and the old timers died out. The moon shining bright and the leaves on the ground. We're the last of our kind, we were hunters